Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the top of page 1280. Aleph Reish Pei. So this last section has been all about the idea that we have a me'ain, a semblance, a similarity of the seamlessness between matter and spirit, between Gashmis and Ruchnis, between heaven and earth, between higher and lower, that will be revealed in the future, where Yudke of mitzvah will be fully revealed, and the Vavke too will be illuminated by the Yudke and be elevated to the level of Yudke. So in the previous paragraph, he spoke about individuals, souls, and certain individuals throughout history that manifested that type of connection, fusion, if you wish. And now in this paragraph, we're talking about the Dvarim, Adam Eichel, Peresein, Be'elam Hazeh, Be'keren Kayemes, Be'elam Haba. The different things the Mishnah and Peah enumerates that a person eats from the fruit in this world, and the keren, the very principle, the core, the essence, is preserved for Elam Haba. So the keren is definitely lost in love. We're not saying that we have today. Today is not the geula. It's not the future. But we have the fruits of it, which is more than just a reflection of light. It's a reflection from an atzmizdika place that draws down energy from a very high level. In this case, Yudke. And he's explaining that these things that the Mishnah enumerates are all rooted in the Gimel Rishenis, which is Keser, Chochma, Bina, and primarily Keser. And from there, that transmits into Vovke. So the Yudke, the Moichim, transmits into the Vovke, and that's what Kibud Ava Aim is. So the first one that he spoke about is Kibud Ava Aim, which we're in the middle of the discussion, which is Abba Imma, Ava Aim, father and mother, refers to Chochma and Bina, but the Pnimius of Chochma and Bina, as they connect to Keser, the Yichud Pnimi, as he called it, the Yichud Pnimi that gives birth, and that is connected, that which gives birth comes from the very Etzem of the Moyach Ha'av, from the Etzem, the Pnimius of Chochma and Bina, and that, the Heishav Levavis al Bonim, that from the Ovis, that transmits into the Bonim, into Vavke, that Vavke should radiate with that same energy. And Navoida, he explained, that is the Avoida where the Midas, that the Meichin is not just to serve and guide the emotions, the subjective emotions, but that the emotions elevate to the level of Muskel, of Midas Sichlim, as we learned at length earlier. Okay. And that's Yiyah, by Yemahu Yiyah, Yudke, that the Yudke will also radiate within the Vavke. And then the last piece we learned that this is also the inyan of Nachal Eson. What's Nachal Eson? Eson refers to Atzmis Chachma. Chachma says the core of Chachma, like the Pnimius of Chachma. Like we learn in Eson Hazrachi, Shem Ab, and I explained yesterday, Shem Ab is the highest of the 4 different configurations in the Miluyim. When you spell out Yud-Ke Vavke, it relates to the level of Ak, Adam Kadmon. It's not Mechudesh, and it's higher than the Shem Ma HaChodesh, which is what emerges in Atzilus. Like he says in the parentheses, the Shem Ma comes from the Shem Ab, but the Shem Ma comes from it is a Bikia, it pierces through the forehead of Ak, so it's still in a state of concealment, and that's an example of the Yud-Ke, as it's in the exchange of Adbash into the Mem Tzadik. And Eson itself, the source of it is the Shem Ab, which is the Etzem Izgalus without that mask or without that filter and Levush garment. U'b'chinas Eson zeh, I'm reading the second line on page 1280. Nimsha gamba nachal shehu zeh b'chinas hamidus, and that's Nachal Eson. Nachal is like a river. River is already flowing outward. Like we know that Vav, we learned Vav is the Hamshacha is like a river. A Vav is like a line that transmits. So from the Yudke of Eson, it goes into the Vavke, of the Nachal. Also in the Midas, that they also get that Atzmis level of Shem Ab. And that's where we stop, by the second line on page 1280. So now we're going to continue. The rest of this paragraph is all still about Kibud Ava Aim, to demonstrate that it has in it an element of a semblance, a similarity to the revelation that will be in the future. The fusion, the seamlessness between Yud-K and Vav-K, and not the structure that we have today, that the Yud-K is concealed in the Mem Tzadik, and the Vav-K is the primary revelation, which is as it relates to us. The bottom line is it's access to inner divine forces that are not accessible in the regular sense of the word through the mitzvahs, the other mitzvahs today. The other mitzvahs, like he said, Shar ha-mitzvahs, that word. The rest, other mitzvahs, is their revelations from the Yud-K in the Mem Tzadik and the Vav-K, and these mitzvahs access that deeper dimension. So for all practical purposes, just to put it in palatable terms, this is all about how deep of a level are we accessing today. La'asid Lavei, all those levels from the highest innermost levels of the Pnimius and Atzmus Ha'oyer, that Meir La'atzmi, that radiates himself, and Helem Ha'oyer and Helem Ha'atzmi will be revealed and will be expressed. Today we have obviously a limited Gilui, based on what we learned earlier, depending on more mitzvahs, less mitzvahs. But now these mitzvahs have access, and they give us access to these deeper dimensions of Yud-K in its purest form. Now, you could always ask, where do you see that? Well, in the Maimorim, I don't know if he's going to say it here, but one of the reasons it says in all the 10 commandments, that only by Kibud Ava Aim does it say Leman Yarichun Yamecha, because you access Arich Hampin and even Atik, so that's why this mitzvah has direct zgula, direct result, is that actually you live longer. Now, of course, we could always ask the question like Acher asked in Gemara, where he saw someone honoring the parents. And not only that, there's another mitzvah, Shiluach HaKan, sending away the mother when you take its chicks. It also says, L'mayin yarichin yemecha, and he saw someone perform both those mitzvahs, and they end up dying, falling off the ladder and dying, which was one of the reasons, one of the questions that ultimately drove him to becoming an apostate. So obviously, there's a hell and a hester in our time, so you don't always see it. But the fact is, the mitzvah is connected to L'man Yarichun Yamecha, and one of the reasons is because it reaches this level, this higher level, so it directly results in longer life. That's one of its revelations, because it's coming from that level of Yud-K. Okay, so now let's read the parentheses on line 2 on page 1280, Aleph Reish Pei, and which can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along the text. The Ayin Mashikosa Bedrush V'Kocha Reish Lamed Zayin, and explore or delve into what it says in the Drush V'Kocha, Tov Reish Lamed Zayin, is a classic hemshech, a series of Maimorim that the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Rashab's father, delivered in the year Tov Reish Lamed Zayin, which corresponds to the year 1877. Tov Reish Lamed Zayin. It's a classic. As a matter of fact, I pointed out many years ago when we were learning Ayin Beis in volume 1, the Kocha seems to be a pretty fundamental discourse that the Rebbe Rashab refers to time and again. He hasn't referred to it for a long time, but especially in volume 1, you could see entire pieces of Ayin Beis are elaborating on the Kocha. I should mention, just as an aside, that the Rebbe Marash was the first Rebbe that instituted Hemsheichim, meaning a mimer, not just one single mimer or a mimer and its explanation or two explanations, but a series of maimorim that last sometimes 5 weeks or 5 maimorim, or sometimes 30 or 40. So the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Marash instituted that. He was the first to do that. First, the Hemshech Mayim Rabim Tov Reish Lamed Vav. It's a long Hemshech, it's a whole sefer. And then V'Kocha Tov Reish Lamed Zayin, and others as well. The Rebbe Rashab, taking that idea, is the Hemshech Samach Vav, Hemshech Ayin Beis are the two big series serials, so to speak, series of Maimonim. But V'kocha is one of them, very fundamental hemshich. So he's referring now to this hemshich. He's saying, look there, the inyan nachal hashitin, shemahapach hashtuz de l'umazeh l'shtuz de kedusha. So there he talks about there's another nachal hashitim is another river called Nechal de Shittim. Now, what is shittim? Shittim can mean like atzei shittim in the Mishkan. Is the shit atzei shittim the cedar wood from which they built the Mishkan. But shittim has many meanings. If you're learning Basar Legani, you see he brings there shittim also comes from the word shtus, because the purpose in the Mishkan was to take the shtus de l'omazeh, which is just shtus, which is like a irrational negative behavior that doesn't make sense. You're just doing it because someone has a desire or a taiva, and the goal is to transform it to shtus, to atzei shittim, to kedusha. So Nachal HaShittim, he talks there about Nachal HaShittim is one of the verses used, I believe it's in one of the prophecies that talks about the river of Shittim. So he explains there that it's the transformation, Mahapich, Hashtuz L'Umazeh L'Shtuz Kedusha, to transform it to a super rational kedusha. So in rational behavior, is rational behavior, it's orderly. Shtuz L'Umazeh, when a person does something that's not rational, that's beneath rational, some transgression or something negative, some desire, some temptation, the way you repair it is by going the other extreme of doing something super rational, higher than rational. As he brings in the Maimer, the story with the Tanoim and Amoraim when they danced at the wedding and they were throwing, and they were basically using. He uses there the expression what is the expression there? The Hanish to say that they behaved in ways that were not the rational way, but it was shtus the kedusha. Like when you dance, when you dance in an uncontrolled manner, where you do somersaults, or you. Sorry. Right. That they behaved in a way that was shtusei, but shtusei the kedusha, like when you go outside of your limits, that was to transform the negative shtus, and to the point that he calls it sheyir kula mashka. Something the Rebbe quotes quite often. Kula mashka, that will be a world, that kula mashka will be completely submerged, a deluge of kedusha, like mola oris deis Hashem kamayim layam mechasim, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. That'll be kula mashka, yem shekule mashka. That's when the entire negative shtus will be transformed. Say negative insanity. Ein adam ever aveda elim kein nichnas by ruach shtus. A person only does a sin when they have a moment of insanity, a moment of blindness, and that will be transformed, and everything will be kula mashka. So he's telling us to go look there in that Maimer, because that will help understand this idea of Eson, Nachal Eson, the idea, like he continues. How do we have the power to transform? It's one thing you have the power to refrain from any negative temptations or from anything that's negative. Refraining is skafia. That's self-control. But transformation requires a greater power. To not just avoid shtus of l'umazeh, to transform it. We learned earlier, to transform the midas that are naturally wired in us, that requires gadlus Abba. You have to go to Eson for that. Mibchinas gadlus Abba shemahapach hamidus legamri. And this idea, he's saying, is in V'kocha, that you need gadlus Abba, the maturity of Chachma, the inner and higher level of Chachma, that has the power to completely transform the emotions. Remember, we said the emotions before elevate to the point that they go beyond their hatfa, beyond their natural wiring and their natural inclinations, and they become on a higher level. That's only gadlus Abba. We learned earlier that Bina does not have the power to do that, because Bina's role is to nurture these midas. So it works with them, it trains them, it elevates them. But transformation outside of their very nature is gadlus Abba. As he writes there in V'kocha, Shezeh inyan umayon mebeis Hashem yetze. A mayon, a spring of water, exited out, emerged from Beis Hashem. And it irrigated. So he's explaining that Umayim Beis Hashem Yetzer, that's Ma'ad Chochma. Ma'ad Chochma, like we learned before, Ma'ad Chochma originates in Ab of Ak. So he says, that's what he explains there, Umayim Beis Hashem Bechinas Ma'ad Chochma, which is godless Abba, and Vihishka, and that irrigates and waters and nourishes the lower levels, which she's referring to is here, of course, Vavke, and the midas, that everything should be Yom Shekule Mashka. It should all be filled with this, with the deeper waters of the spring waters that go all the way back to godless Abba, which originate all the way in Keser and even higher in Pnimius Atzmus Ein Sof. So the Kocha clearly is like one of the sources for this idea that he's discussing here. Now he's going to go back to Kibud Av V'Eim, which draws from this level. Remember, Abba Imma, father and mother, is Chachma Bina, and Kibud Av V'Eim, as he said, is the exact language that he said. In Kibud Av V'Eim, Hu Amshachim Abba V'Imma Lezun, from Yudke to Vavke, to the point that the Vavke becomes saturated with the Yudke Kula Mashke. Yeah. V'zeh mamshichim. Continuing now on page 1280. And this dimension that we're discussing here, this level, these higher levels, zeh mamshichim ha'idei kibud av v'eim. And this we draw down through and we transmit through kibud av v'eim. So the deeper kavanah, or the deeper meaning in honoring parents, is honoring Chachman Bina, the premius of Chachman Bina, that should be that through. So Kibud Av V'Eim, we draw from that into the Banim, the children that are honoring the parents. So in addition to the simple meaning of the mitzvah, that it's the right thing to do, to honor your parents who brought you to this world, is that in addition to that, there's also something that children are benefiting from. And that is the Hamshachah from these levels of Yudke into Vavke. Okay, I'll stop here for a moment if anybody wants to ask anything. And the next piece is going to start going into connecting it to what we learned earlier, because right now we're talking about the Hamshachah from Abba Ve'ima into Yudke into Vavke. But Vavke has a role to play in all of this, and we're going to learn that in a moment. But I'll stop for any questions, if anybody has any questions.
Why is Nachal Midas?
What?
Why is Nachal Midas?
I just explained. Nachal is a river. It's the letter Vav. It's a Hamshachah. Midas are Mamshich. Yudke is La'atzmei. Chachma Bina is the Gili La'atzmei. The Vav and Hey, the Vav is Mamshich, the Moichin. So Zah is Hamshachah, the river that from there which flows from Chachma Bina.
Thank you.
Yeah. More in detail, sometimes Nachal is Bina, the Cheves Hanor, that comes from Chachma. But sometimes you speak in general Moichin, especially here, the Gimel Rishen is Kachab. You speak that about that being like the source, and from there flows the. And there's a for the Abba has a footnote about it, and I believe Vayetze Tov Mem Zayin, how it starts in Bina, but then from Bina becomes the Hamshachah into Midas. Okay. So now he's going to continue, and before we read, let me just refresh your memory about something we learned earlier. Remember, I've been speaking about Yichud Chitzeni of Chachma Bina, is how Chachma Bina are, or how Bina especially, Eim Revetzes ala Frechim, Imma Revia Albonin, that she hovers and protects and nurtures and guides and trains her children, her offspring. That's how Chachma Bina, especially Bina, relates to the Midas. That's in the earlier stages when the Midas need that type of guidance. But then comes the Shalach to Shalach Hasa'im, when you send away the mother. So we learned earlier, the Rebbe Rashab explained, that the meaning of that is that the Midas have now matured. and they send away the mother. They've matured to the point that you can send the mother. They catapult the mother back to her atzmius bina to stand side by side with chachma, and that leads to the yichud pnimi zivuk shlim of chachma bina, that they can then unite in an internal, intimate way as they gaze at chachma, as at arich, at metzach of the forehead of arich, which draws the 370 energies and lights of atik. So what you see here is that the midas have now become actually a force that drives the moichin to deeper levels. And we learned also how the moichin, so the moichin both guides the midas. The midas then push and elevate the moichin, and then together you have one total consumption that a person is completely consumed, both their moichin and then the midas with b'chol moedecha. It's negei benefesh, as he said. Chaya nafshi, it's negei benefesh, that his whole life is dependent on God. So the meichin also are working in higher levels than they would have on their own. And all that is that union of a person completely consumed with godliness. So all these stages we learned earlier. He's now going to connect it with this idea of kibud av'aim. So far we spoke about kibud av'aim, is that the mitzvah is mamshich, yudke and tevavke. So now he says, Va'inyan who? The bichdei sheyeh v'heshav leiv ovis al bonim. In order to have the leiv ovis, which means the leiv of the ovis, we could say the midas of moichin, or moichin, chachma bina, should be nimshach al bonim, into zah, into zun, into the midas, yudke and tevavke, who al yedei, the second half of the verse, v'leiv bonim al avesam. That the leiv bonim in turn it also transmits to the avesa, like the Rashi brings, and this is a famous statement that Abba would refer to a lot when he spoke about Tzivus Hashem, that it's not just the parents that are guiding the children; the heart of the children will also cause the parents to return. Rashi says, "Leiv bonim al avesam al yedei habonim," that through the bonim, they will in turn elevate the ovis. So it's not just a one-way street that the parents educate and nurture the children also nurture the parents. The children elevate the parents. That's even in a physical sense of the word. You see this with children and parents. It's true that parents are the mashpiyim that nurture and take care of and nourish their children, but there's also the other way around, that the bonim yalu es avis u'kamoi chagas merkava la'abba ve'imo lahales abba ve'imo. This is something we learned earlier. Like chagas becomes a merkava, a chariot for chachma bina, lahales abba ve'imo. What does a chariot do? When you're walking on your own, you can only reach that far, you can only go that quickly. When you're in a chariot, the chariot physically elevates you. First of all, you're riding on the chariot, so you're already higher. And the chariot carries you to places you couldn't go on your own. So Kabbalah and Chassidus explain that Chagas does this to Abba ve'Imma. So even though Chagas is a lower level initially, like a chariot, but that chariot is like a Chagas is a Merkava la'Abba ve'Imma, lahales Abba ve'Imma, to elevate Chachma and Bina. Let me just give you the pages where this was discussed earlier in case you want to look it up. It's quite a while back, but let's look there already. Let's already see it. Okay, Gadlus Abba ve'Imma, the Chachma is the only one that can transform, is essentially on page 1230 all the way till 1234. Even further, 1236. Yeah. That's when he introduces the two Yechudim. I just want to see where he talks about how the Midah is. I believe it's somewhere 1238 or 1239, or maybe even later. The first time he mentions, just a moment. remember, it's on the left side of the page. The first time he mentioned aim.
1240 bottom and 1242. The sixth line up. Dehine ha'oz hen ha'merkaba v'hu ha'oz shehen hen b'chines chagas v'hen b'chines merkaba v'chachma v'im.
Where are you reading?
The sixth line from the bottom on 1242.
Okay. I think it's already earlier, but yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That point of Merkava is at the bottom of page 1242, correct? And that's where, yeah. And then on the next page, he talks about how the Midas elevate the Moichin. Yeah. Okay, good. So basically, page 1242 and on. I thought he may mention it earlier, but let's just say 1242 and on is fine. Good. So, and there he brings that idea. Okay, so Chagas Mekavel Aval Halis Abim. The who Inyan, and this is the Inyan like we learned earlier, the Ava B'chol Meidecha Shen is Bar Le'el. The Ava B'chol Meidecha, which is more than just B'chol Levavcha and B'chol Nafshecha, which is still within the structure. B'chol Levavcha is still the Keiches. The B'chol Levavcha is the heart, the emotions, and B'chol Nafshecha are all the faculties, like he explained earlier. Chol Meidecha goes beyond. That's an elevation that's beyond the regular structure of emotions. So this is the Abba b'chol Meidecha shezbo shayidei nimsha b'chinas premius Abba ve'Imma, through which is nimshach, is drawn and transmits the inner Abba ve'Imma, u'sheyegili bezun. So the midas here now are causing the meichin to go deeper into premius chachma bina, like even physically. When the children get older and they don't need their mother that much to take care of them, so the mother can go back, so to speak, and the father to be with each other and dig and explore deeper and reach deeper levels of the understanding and appreciating godliness. So we have now, so they've elevated, and that there should be the gilui bezun. But now it's a gili from Primis Abba ve'Imma. It's not just the gili that was there before, which was Chesenius Abba ve'Imma, that was giving to the zun, to the midas, to zun, but from an outer dimension. Now it's been elevated to Primis, and that's being transmitted into zun. Zon Malchus. And this is Kibud Ava'im. So it's more than just that the midas are honoring Chacham and Bina, and Vavke, so-called, is elevated to Yutke, but now Vavke is actually causing the elevation. Kibud Ava'im haveda de reusa de liba ba'mokas hamoichin dafke. That naveda, that is reusa de liba, the desire of the heart, ba'mokas hamoichin dafke, with a deep concentration of the moichin. So it's not just the outer dimension of moichin; it's a hamokas hamoichin. And this was explained earlier at length about how the midas, except earlier we didn't speak the language of Yutke Vavke. Earlier it was the language of midas and moichin. Now we're speaking Vavke Yutke, as in Vavke being the midas. So the midas elevating the Yutke to this level of Hamokas HaMoichin, to the deeper level of Chacham Bina, and that in turn elevates Vavke to the level of Yutke. Vayidei Zeh Nasa, that's what he says next. So they add a word. Right? They say nasa kan, nasa chibur. They're add below, they suggest the word chibur. They say nasa chibur yudke b'vavke. I would say nasa amshachas yudke b'vavke, because he didn't use the word chibur before. He used the word amshachah, or maybe he did use it. Let me see. Okay. So you could say Yudke B'Vavke, or Chibur is maybe more correct. You could say Sheyeh Begili Mamish, that the Yudke should be revealed in Vavke Begili Mamish. Okay. Let me stop again here because he's going to bring some more material on this topic in a moment. But if anybody want to ask anything, so here's a good place to pause, and then we'll go further here. So remember, in the mitzvah kibud av v'eim, we don't just have a father and a mother. We have the children are honoring father and mother. So earlier we said the first step was that as they honor them, they draw from the Yud K into the Vav K to the point, the Heshav Levavas Albonim, that the Yud K goes into the Vav K, like we learned in the previous page. But now he's also adding Ubonim Leibonim Alavesam, that you're also adding that this is coming through the Aveda of the Kibud Ava'im, that the children are actually elevating. They're not just honoring and drawing from that level, they're elevating Abba ve'Imma to that level, and in turn they draw down. Now, why didn't he mention this earlier? Could be he's doing it in stages, but the bottom line is the whole picture is now that this goes in both directions, as we said. So now he's going to bring from the Zohar to complete the picture, going to bring some more sources on this idea, and he says like this. Ubezohar Vayikra Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and in Zohar Vayikra 12a, Isa, it says in that Zohar, Ksiv Kabed Avicha V'Simecha. The Zohar is saying, the Pasuk says, honor your father and your mother. V'Ksiv B'Maaseh Bereishis, and by creation, by the story of creation, the Pasuk says, Yehi Me'eres B'Rakia Hashamayim. That which corresponds to the honoring, that the fifth Aseres HaDibros, the fifth Dibur, the fifth commandment is honoring your parents. The fifth Asar Maimaris, as he's going to say in the parentheses, that they correspond to each other, is that there should be luminaries in heaven. Yehi B'Rakia Shamayim, in the heaven. The Mavayasham, he explains in the parentheses, in the Zohar there he explains, because he explains how the 10 commandments correspond to the 10 statements that God used to create existence. So like Anochi Hashem Elokecha corresponds to Bereshis Bara Elokim, and so on. So the fifth of the 10 commandments is honoring your parents. And the fifth of the Asar Maimaris is the creation of the luminaries, the sun and the moon and the luminaries in heaven, celestial bodies. And the Zohar says that kabed, honoring your parents, corresponds to Ma'eris. So the Zohar continues. What's the connection between the two? What do the luminaries in heaven have to do with honoring your parents? It says, my kamaida. What is the connection? What is it talking about here? What's the relationship between them? It says, Ella, Ilan Ma'eris Dohu Avicha V'imecha. These Ma'eris, these luminaries, sun and moon, are actually the level of Avicha and Imecha, are the level of your father and your mother. Avicha da Shimsha. Avicha is the sun. That is the sun. Imecha da Sira. Your mother is the level of the moon. And that's the connection. Sun and moon are like father and mother. Or the Ein Shimsha Elakut Shebrichu. The Zohar continues. And what does this heaven refer? What does the sun refer to? Ein Shimsha Elakut Shebrichu. The sun doesn't refer to anything but God Himself. Shenemer ki shemesh hamogen havai elikim. The pasuk says, shemesh hamogen, the sun and its sheath or its shield, is havai elikim. So the shemesh is compared to the Eibishter. Havai elikim. Havai. Okay, so therefore, what we're talking father now, we mean Avinu Shebashamayim, father in heaven. That's what the sun is referring to. What about the moon? The less sira el knesses Yisrael. And less sira, there's no, he's going in the negative. He's saying there's no moon except Knesses Yisrael is the level of Malchus, of Knesses Yisrael, which is the community of Israel, refers to the source of the neshamas of the Jews. This neshamas Yisrael, Knesses Yisrael. That's why we say Yichud Kutchebrichu V'Shchinta is sometimes Kutchebrichu and Shchina is Knesses Yisrael. Knesses Yisrael is a level. Literally, it means like the Knesset, the gathering of Israel, but it refers to in Kabbalah Chassidus refers to a level, usually Malchus, that is the like where all the souls originate from. So therefore, Shimsha and Sira, sun and moon, is Kutchebrichu and Knesset Yisrael. Shenemar Yarechecha lo Yosef.
V'yarchech.
V'yarchech refers to the moon. And your moon, Le Yosef, I'm not sure what the proof is, but it probably, because there the moon refers to Knesset Yisrael, like it says in the Gemara that Yisrael, Damon L'Levana and Meinin L'Levana, that the Jewish people are compared to the moon. So the moon is the level of Knesset Yisrael. I'm not positive what the proof is. I have to look it up, but he clearly bringing a proof from that. Shemesh Shemagan Havai Elikim is very clear. What is the pasuk? Do you remember? B'yarchich le Yosef. Okay. Ad kan l'shene means this is the actual language. Until here is the language that he cited from the Zohar. So the Rebbe Rashab now explains mefarish. That means the Zohar is explaining the Abba ve'Imma, father and mother, who inya shimsha v'sira is sun and moon, which is the level of Zoh and Malchus. Zoh and Malchus.
This is in Ishayahu. In Ishayahu. Lo yavoy oid shimshech, v'yarchech lo yeosef, ki havaye hi eloch le'er oilom. V'shomo yemei evlech.
Okay. So he's talking about the Jewish people. Yeah. What's the pasuk? What kapitel? What pasuk?
Kapitel Samach Pasuk Chof.
Okay. I'll look
That the sun and the moon is not going to disappear. It's not going to come because the Eibishter will be for you, the Oilom.
Yeah. Okay. So he explains that Abba ve'Imma is sun and moon, which is Zoh and Malchus. Well, if he's that Sarach Lemer,
it's probably that the sun and the moon are not going to disappear anymore because the Eibishter will be for you, the Oilom.
Yeah. Lufi Zed Sarach Lemer, according to this, we have to say the Inyan Kibud Ava Aim, according to the Zohar now, he says, according to this, because here he just said what Abba ve'Imma is. That is the sun and the moon, so it corresponds to the Ma'iris, to the luminaries. But he says it's the mitzvah of honoring your parents. So he says, Lafi Zeh, according to the Zohar, you have to say the Inyan Kibud Ava Aim, that Kibud Ava Aim is who Ke'inyan Sarah Hisifa ala Ma'iris. So there's a Maimer Razal, he's going to quote it in a moment, that Sarah, the Ma'iras give off light. But Sarah, the Medrash says, added to the light of the Ma'iras. So remember, Kibud Ava Aim, as we learned, is more than just Abba ve'Imma. It's not just Zoh and Malchus. Honoring Abba ve'Imma, honoring it, adds something to it. So he's now going to explain what does it add. So he's saying it's similar to what it says that Sarah added to the Ma'iris. And here's the Medrash. Ukadiisa b'Medrash Rabbah, Vayeda Parsha Nun Gimel, the Medrash Rabbah on Parsha Nun Gimel, chapter 53, where he talks about when Sarah heard that she's going to have a child, the Temer Sarah, Tzcheik Oseli Elikim. When she heard this, she's saying, God making fun of me? So, I'm a 90-year-old woman. How can I have a child? So what is this Tzcheik Oseli Elikim? So the Medrash says, Sarah hisifa ala Ma'iris. She added to the Ma'iris. Why? Because by the Ma'edis Nemar, when you read in the pasuk, it says Osa Ama'edis. Nemar Osa, v'Nemar Lahalan v'Yasa Likim Eshnei Ma'edis Agdeli. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. Sada said the word Vatema Sada Tzchek Osa Li Elikim. And by the Ma'edis, it said Vayas Elikim Eshnei Ma'edis Agdeli. So Sada made it even stronger. Vayas means God created the two luminaries in heaven. And when Sada said Tzchek Osa Li Elikim, Osa is even stronger, as he explains, V'hainu ki mashakosov Tzchek Osa Li Elikim hu b'chinas hatzchek v'atainu ge'elyon she'is gala la'osid. So the Ma'eda is Vayas. God made it in the passive word Vayas. God created the statement. It's not in the passive. I'm sorry. Vayas is in the what's the word I want to use? I forgot the word. But Osa is behavior. Tzchek Osa. God is making me laugh. Tzchek Osa. God is created is Osa, not Vayas. So Vayas is the creation of the Ma'edas. They give off the light they give off. The Medrash is saying that when Sarah said Tzchek Osa Li Elikim, she was adding a deeper dimension. Chassidus explains that what is the deeper dimension? Tzchek, a laughter, a simcha, and a tainug that's more than regular flow. So she added even to what God created the Ma'edas, even a greater light, a greater energy. And what is that energy? That's the tainug elyon she'is gala la'osid, which will be revealed in the future. As he explains, as he writes and explains in Torah Eir, in the Maimer of V'shafti b'shalom, on this verse, he discusses this idea. So when a person is regular communication, there's no laughter, there's no particular joy or simcha, so it's a regular flow. When there's a tzchek, is a laughter, means that it's coming from, like he calls it, which will be Oz Yemola Schek Pine. When will there be the full schek? Laughter and smile. And simcha will be lost love it. And that's what Sarah was referring to. So even though initially it sounds like Sarah was, in a way, mocking God, but the truth is, her laughter actually revealed a deeper dimension, because the idea that Yitzchak should be born at this point is not natural. Something deeper was revealed, and Sarah's laughter reflected that. So that's a sifa la ma'eris. So if Abba ve'Imma, sun and moon, is the ma'eris, kibud ava'im, as he's going to explain, honoring is like drawing something deeper than just the Abba ve'Imma and Zohar Malchus on their own. V'hu, and what tainug is this pleasure? What is this deeper pleasure that comes through this? It says, Hu tainug she'yeh idei Birurim. This is the deeper pleasure that comes through the Avodas HaBirurim, the work that we do in separating and refining and elevating existence. This is a God who rejoices in his ma'asav, in his actions, in his creations. As we learned earlier about Simcha Shal Mitzvah, that it draws the Simcha from above. So now he's quoting Kutei Torah that talks about there, that this tainu comes from Avodas HaBirurim. I'll explain this in a moment. I just want to read it all, then I'll go into a little more elaboration. The Inyan Miyat HaYereach. So since we're talking about the Ma'edis, so there's the Ma'edis as they are sun and moon, but then also came the diminishment of the moon. And the moon is Malchus. That refers to who Yeridus HaMalchus Levarer Birurim Kaneda. The diminution of the moon is Malchus, that now is its energy has been drained from it to some extent, in order to be able to go down and do Birurim. By Dezeh, and through these Birurim, then comes something even greater than was there before. Through that, Hesifa la Ma'edis B'chinas HaTzchek v'Atainu Ge'elyon. And through that, she's Sarah, which is the level of Malchus, most likely, increased to the Ma'edis as they were before. The laughter and the pleasure, the supernal laughter and pleasure. I'm going to finish to the end of the paragraph and then I'll explain. V'ayim asher kosa b'dibur hamaskil tachlis asher avata b'simcha d'tovkuf samach beis. Oh, that's a very famous mimer from the Alter Rebbe. Be'in yesora nachsas b'solkas, that she came and went. She arrived. V'sol nachsas means to, like in a way, like not ratzi v'shuv, but to travel and to go down and up. Basically, it's going Malchus going down and then going upwards, elevating. The Gam Yedua, and now again I'm going to explain in a moment. And it's also known, the Yichud Shimsha V'Sira, that the joining and the fusion of sun and moon, Hu B'chinas Yichud Pnimi, the Zon, that's the inner union and fusion of Zohar Malchus, like it says elsewhere, B'dibur hamaskil v'yemer le'yenus and memches. In the mind v'yemer le'yenus, memches most likely is Tofresh memches, a mimer from the Rebbe Rashab where he discusses this topic. Okay, now this is a very compact and dense little piece here. So let me unpack it and explain exactly what's going on. Now,
maybe memches maybe.
Oh no, you're right. My mistake. It's probably Vayemer Leyenus and Mocha Chedesh. Yeah. Not memches. Correction. Mocha Chedesh. Where he talks about the Yichud. I was wondering why he would say memches. You're right. It's Mocha Chedesh. It's most likely a mimer from the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek, a famous Mocha Chedesh mimer in Eda Teda Bereshis. Yeah. Okay. So briefly, let's just unpack this. Let's just explain it. And it goes back all the way to the beginning of volume 3, where he talked about the sun and the moon. So let's talk about the sun and the moon. Let's start with the Ma'eris. The Pasuk says that the Eibishter said, Yehi Ma'eris b'shamayim b'rekia b'shamayim Ma'eris hagdelim. Two great luminaries, the sun and the moon. Then he says, Asamoyer hagadol and Amoyer hakot, the larger and the smaller. So the Gemara asks, what's going on? First he says, Me'eris hagdelim, they're both great. And then he says, one is big and one is small. So we know from that the moon came to God and said, Iyefshe, l'shnei ksanim b'melech echad, or shnei melachim b'kesed echad, rather. You can't have two kings with one crown. Basically, you can't have two great luminaries. You need one. So God said, L'chi u'ma'ati esatzmach, go ahead and diminish yourself. And from there on, you have the Moira Godel and the Moira Kot. The moon then became a smaller light, and it receives its light from the sun. Now, this idea is symbolic, more than symbolic. In Kabbalah, it's a major theme. It's a major theme of what is the story behind the story. So in Kabbalistic terms, sun and moon is Zohar and Malchus, Mashpia and Makabel. In the beginning of creation, they were both, Malchus was on the same level as Zohar. If you remember, we learned how Malchus is on the same stature, the 7 levels of Aliyas HaMalchus. That's how it was in the beginning. They were equal. But then, for the different reasons, and the bottom line is, it's actually ultimately, it's for benefit, that we need Malchus to be diminished in order to be able to relate to lower levels. And like he says, to be Yered and to be Yah. Because Zohar remains in Atzilus. Zohar is the Mashpia. Malchus, Ragleh Yerdes Lamata, it's the level of kingship that reaches out to the next worlds of Biyah. And its purpose is, like we say every Friday night, Neshus Chayil, Batitin Teref Lebesa, to be Mavar the Birurim of Biyah. So though on one hand, it seems like a Yerida, and it is, Yerida Samalchus, but this Yerida Sherech Aliyah, it's ultimately going to lead to an elevation, because what's its role, Malchus's role, is to give us the power to enter and engage with Biyah, which is not Atzilus, pure Alakus. You're now dealing with Misham Yaparid, a world that has its own identity, and especially when you go lower and lower, And Malchus' job is to refine that world and elevate it. And when you do that, not only does Malchus reach the same level as the sun, it goes higher. Because it achieved the tzchik and tainug, the pleasure of Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyis Le'Dira B'Tachteinu. That could only be achieved through Birurim. If Malchus was remained in Atzilus, but together with Zod, yes, they would both benefit and they both be great luminaries. But you wouldn't have the idea of Yeridus HaNeshama B'Guf, where the Neshama, compared to Knesset Yisrael, Malchus comes down into this world. And with the power of Malchus, it works and elevates the universe. And a result reaches an aliyah tzchek v'tainug. Now in the La'osid Lavi, that will be revealed. And that's when the moon will not just elevate to the level of the sun, but will be mashpia into the sun. Or Malchus will be mashpia into Zohar. Like we learned earlier, Biti, Achesi, Imi. When Malchus is Biti, it's Makabel from Zohar. It's the daughter of the king. When it's Achesi, it's an equal, like the Tanoim Amirayim. And Imi is when it's the level of Bina that reaches all the way up to the highest levels, and that is Mashpia. The mother is Mashpia, like we learned. She'itra le'imay. Yem Chassidus zemat and Teira, what he said, the Kesher She'itra le'imay, that his mother puts the Kesher on Zah because of the elevation of Malchus, which we learned earlier more at length. If you go back to page 1254, where he talks about this idea, the level of coming back to Imi, Mashpia. Okay, that's a brief summary of this concept. Now, how does this apply to Kibud Av'Eim? So he says Kibud Av'Eim is a similar idea. Abba v'Imma is Chacham Bina. Now he's brought it down that Abba v'Imma, according to the Zohar, is sun and moon, Zohar and Malchus. That's what he said. It's Zohar and Malchus. That's on their own. And on their own, that's the Ma'edus on their own, which includes, of course, that one will be diminished, ultimately, the moon. But now comes Kibud Av'Eim. Kibud Av'Eim does similar to what Sarah did. It's honoring and elevating. Hesif ala Ma'edus, and it elevates, like we said before, like we said before by the Vovke and the Yudke, that the Midas elevate the Meichin. Same to here, the Kibud Av'Eim, it elevates the Ma'edus, which is Abba ve'Imma, to a higher level, to the level that we just said, where Malchus or the Levana Sira elevates through the Tzchek v'Tainug Elyon that it causes, similar to what Sarah achieves. Now, Sarah seems to be the level of Malchus, so that would mean, the only thing I'm confused, maybe it's consistent, that if Malchus is the moon, and the moon is Malchus goes down to B'Yedi the Biyah, so it's the mother that's elevating higher than the father, but he doesn't say that explicitly. He says clearly it's Kibud Av'Eim. This is Kibud Av'Eim. That Kibud Av'Eim, let me just see this again. Yeah, that they add to the Me'edus, they add the element of Asa, Tzchek Asa.
Yes, Skalkus Tainik, Pnimis of Kessa, which that's what it ultimately is.
Okay. And then finally, the Yichud of Shimsha v'Simra is good. Yeah. So creates the Yichud Pnimi of Zun, and that happens through Kibud Av'Eim. Okay. With that, I'll conclude the paragraph, and if you want to ask any questions, go ahead.
This is completely a different understanding in Kibud Av'Eim what it means, but that's what it is. Kibud Av'Eim is reaching this.
Well, what do you mean? You never learned it before, but this is in Kabbalah and Chassidus. This is how it explains Kibud Av'Eim.
Yeah, but this is connected to the physical kibbutz avoim.
Every mitzvah has hamshachas alyenis that do very deep hamshachas. He's explaining how kibbutz avoim is in its deepest root. It's not just a nice mitzvah. It also reflects on the deepest hamshachas. You can connect it to the actual mitzvah too, because when you honor your parents, you are elevating them, and you're also elevating yourself. Yeah. Interesting also, like I mentioned a number of times, how many Mara Mekamis, the Rebbe Rashab here, besides the Zohar, he brought here, I'm just counting, the Mara Mekamis in Chassidus. He brings here the Maimer V'Shavti B'Sholem, the Maimer Hashemli B'Ezri, the Maimer Tachas Asher Avadata B'Simcha this, and the Maimer Yemele Yenison. 4 Maimorim in these few lines. Interesting. Wow. Okay, so there's a lot to look up and to unpack. Okay, yeah. So, you want to ask anything?
Yeah, Sarah is Malchus, as you said, and Zun is the Shemesh, the sun and the moon. So through her avodas of Birurim, Malchus as it descends, it became smaller into lower levels of Biyah. Then it comes back and it is able to mashpia into the sun. It'll be greater than the sun, which is their armpit, right? Good. So the levels of Nekeva then mashpia into Zohar, into sun and the moon. But then how does that relate to Abba and Imma? Because those are Chachma and Bina. Whereas we've been talking here, Zun is the midos into Malchus. How does that come up? I thought we're saying here that she then can mashpia into the.
So let me just make 2 things clear. First of all, it's another interpretation. The Zohar says Abba ve'Imma Zohar and Malchus is sun and moon. There's an interpretation that's referring to Chachma and Bina. There's another interpretation that's referring to Zohar and Malchus. That's first of all. And that's not uncommon, 2 different interpretations. And they both have significant, they have ultimately similar elevation that happens. Secondly, we actually learned earlier that the Yichud Chachma and Bina leads to the Yichud of Zohar and Malchus as well. As far as Sarah goes, that was my addition. Don't make that the primary thing. I said it could be Sarah's the level of Malchus. I have some issues with that because we're not talking about how the mother elevates the father. We're talking about how the children elevate the parents. So Kibbutz Avoim is most likely, maybe that's the level of Sarah, but it's referring to the level how the children are, through the Birurim, are elevating Abba ve'Imma, in this case, the sun and the moon. But it's a little challenging because if the moon is Malchus the children or is Malchus the mother? That's not clear to me. But he's clearly saying that Kibbutz Avoim is similar to what Sarah did, where she added to the Ma'oris through the Tzchok and Tainug, that even more than the Ma'oris, even greater what she did through her Avedas. So it sounds to me that maybe the Avedas HaBirurim is connected to the children, and that ultimately elevates Malchus and unites Malchus and Zohar, and elevates it as well. Let me see. Yeah, and also I want to look into my Maimorim that he cites to understand more details. But that's the picture as I understand it right now. So it's definitely 2 different interpretations here that have a similar idea, that Kibbutz Avoim, bottom line, reaches into the Yichud Pnimi, either of Chachma and Bina, or into the Yichud Pnimi of Zohar and Malchus, which also is Tainug and Tzchok and Tainug Elyon. That will be revealed in the future. That's the key. So Kibbutz Avoim is manifesting a gili of the Asad Lave, whether it's through Zohar and Malchus or Chachma and Bina. That's how I think it's how he separates, like 2 different explanations. Okay.
Maybe he doesn't mean to say that sorrow is the Kibud Avoim. The Kibud Avoim is stuck at the bonim. He's only bringing the.
Yeah, but the problem is it's not about Sarah alone. It's about Malchus. If Malchus is the moon, so where's the bonim? If Malchus is the mother, which is the moon, so where's the level of the bonim here? Is it Malchus as it goes down into Biyah? Probably. That's how it makes most sense. So Malchus is the moon, Zah is the mother, Zah is the Shemesh, the father, and Kibud Aveim elevates them Hesif ala Me'edis through the Birurim of Biyah. So it sounds like that the children is the Birurim of Biyah, which add and increase to sun and moon to the point that it unites them and elevates them.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense because that's
actually he doesn't even say, one second, it doesn't even say here, by the way. I may have just confused matters by adding this because I added it from before. He doesn't even say here that Malchus is Mashpi and Zah. So let's make that clear. He doesn't even mention that. He says there's the Miyot HaLevana, and through the Birurim, let's just see the language. Levada Birurim, V'aydeizeh Yisif ala Me'edis. And the Me'edis, on the sun and the moon. So it could be here, he's not emphasizing the idea that the moon is mashpi in the sun. Here he's emphasizing how kibud, how the children, the birurim, are elevating both sun and moon. Yeah, so the sun and moon were ma'edis, they were strong, two great luminaries. The moon diminished for birurim. Through the birurim, you come schek and tainuk, and that adds to the ma'edis, like Sarah added to the ma'edis when she said, schek asali alikim. I think that's more accurate, and let's not mention here that the Malchus being Mashpi and Zah, even though it's correct that the moon will be Mashpi in the sun, but that's not what he's saying here. So I threw that in because I thought I was connecting it all, and I realized that went a little too far and makes things a little more confusing here. Okay, go ahead, Yitzchak, you wanted to say something.
Well, are you saying now that it's not Malchus that's coming into, or rather raising up Biyah?
It doesn't. It says Malchus descends into Biyah, and the Birurim elevate the Me'edis, Malchus and Zah, moon and sun. That's what he says here. Okay. He does not speak about how Malchus is Mashpia in Zah. That's the point I wanted to correct. He's talking about how Kibud Aveim, the children, their honoring is the same as the adding to the Me'edis that comes through Birurim. So the sun and moon are equal, initially equal Ma'edis, sun and moon, father, mother, Zah, Malchus. The moon gets diminished and goes down to Biyah. Through that, it creates Birurim. And that causes a deep, supernal pleasure, tzchoik, laughter and pleasure, which adds and increases now to the Ma'edis, Hesif ala Ma'edis, like Sarah added. So the Kibud Aveim adds to the Aveim, the sun and the moon, makes them both brighter, basically. That's what he says here. Okay. There's another discussion about the moon elevating and being mashpi in the sun. That's also correct. That through Birurim that also happens, but that's not what he's saying here per se. That's all. It's fine. That makes it much clearer. As I said, I overspoke, basically.
I was just thinking if there's Birurim and Biyah, that would be an elevation of Biyah that would be like the Zohar in these worlds, I mean the lower worlds. But maybe that takes it too
He's
far.
not talking about that at all.
Yeah, I realize that I was trying to make that connection, but you can't do it.
Kibud Aveim is a mitzvah. This mitzvah both reaches and elevates and Abba ve'Imma, Chachma and Bina, to the higher levels of Yud-K and Vav-K. And also now on the levels of Zah Malchus, it elevates Zah Malchus as well. And that's why Kibud Aveim is one of the unique mitzvahs that you have Peres, and the keren, the etzem of it will be lost of it. But today we already have some of the fruits of that revelation. Okay. So we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on 1280. Next paragraph is going to start with Gemilas Chasadim. another item among the things that we eat